Okay, guys, this is day 6 of industrialization, immigration, and urbanization. And today we're going to be talking about those 1% of the folks that controlled 90% of. These are known as the robber barons, or the super. First guy we're going to talk about is Cornelius Vanderbilt, and you've probably heard that name. He was the first multi-million-dollar robber baron, and he is a railroad tycoon. Vanderbilt got his nickname the Commodore because he started out with steamboats, and from steamboats he went to railroads. He was known for what they called hostile takeovers of other railroads, buying out everybody basically in the northeast all the way to Chicago. And he controlled all of those northern railroads, Erie Railroad, Central Railroad. Eventually, when he passes away, he's going to be worth about $100 million, or $1.7 billion in today's dollars. He made one significant donation, which you might be familiar with. He established Vanderbilt University, the Commodores. Jay Gould, he actually was pretty poor when he started out. He was his daddy was a farmer, and he is going to go to work for Vanderbilt. And basically when he goes to work for Vanderbilt, he's going to cheat and get some inside information. He gets investors to kind of buy a stock and manipulate the stock, and then he makes his fortune basically cheating Vanderbilt. Then he goes on and he is going to use his money for the Western railroads, including controlling Western Union Telegraph. When he dies, his fortune was about $77 million, or $1.6 billion in today's money.
As General Grant became President Grant, railroad finance entered a squalid phase of monopoly capitalism. Grant's tomb is a memorial to the best of Lincoln's generals who used railroads to win, and one of the least fortunate of his successors as president, having been caught up in railroad scandals. The Homestead Act and the Railroad Act, passed during the war, produced a great post-war boom. But this is not a celebratory building. It's a symbol of the loss of idealism in the blood and the mud of the Civil War. Hundreds of thousands of youthful people went to work and went to war, fervent for national service. Afterward, in the exhaustion of war, a surge of cynicism swept across the country, and a disillusioned nation abandoned the gospel of civic virtue and embraced instead a gospel of private gain. Today's markets are regulated. Unregulated trading in railroad stocks after the Civil War led to corners, collapses, monopolies, and fraud. The old trading companies range from the Far East to Hudson's Bay, but there's a difference between owning and occupying and trading. The holding company, the trust, and the monopolies stretching all across the country were new things. The modern corporation came into being with the railroad, internationally financed, continental in its reach, and with it a new kind of capitalist, playing for much higher stakes with brand new rules. The old traders aspired to be gentlemen, and the new monopolists and tycoons aspired to be rich. Some of the railroad stock manipulators were rightly called robber barons. Cornelius Vanderbilt, Daniel Drew, Jay Cook, Jim Fisk, Jay Gould, Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington, Edward Harriman, and Henry Villard. They devoured much of the wealth of the nation. Though the stakes were high at the top, those stakes were paid at the bottom. Jay Gould produced a panic in 1869. Jay Cook's collapse brought on the Depression of 1874. During the railroad age, many of the celebrated panics of Wall Street were caused by manipulating railroad stocks by raids and predatory short selling. Though the country was expanding, during those short-term panics, conditions among the working people were hideous. In New York, in the Panic of '74, 90,000 people were so destitute they took shelter in police stations. 4 years later, discouraged immigrants going back to Europe from places like Castle Clinton were so desperate that after the steamship Metropolis sank, full of immigrants, hundreds begged for places on the very next ship to get away from America. Farmers felt the effects of these black doings on Wall Street in the prices they paid for their crops, costs to bring crops to market, and prices for machinery. The farmers used all sorts of new machines, but they resented railroad rates and the monopoly of some of the best land. And it was on the farms that railroads first met real public opposition. Farmers weren't radicals and resisted joining labor unions, but they banded together in orders like the Grange for education and political action. The Grange, like other farmers' associations, opposed the railroad monopolists. Tom Woods is a biographer of Oliver Kelly, founder of the Grange, and he's good at leading oxen, too.
Well, Oliver Kelly came to Minnesota in 1850 from Boston, and he was the son of a tailor, came out here basically to speculate on land, and ended up farming, and then eventually founded the Grange in 1867. What they wanted was to reinvigorate individual liberty in America, and they also wanted to control monopoly capitalism. And we saw that throughout the 19th century in the Populist Party. We saw that in the early 20th century with the Progressives, and we're seeing that in many political parties today. The American promise was that everybody had an opportunity for economic success, and what the railroad did was they combined to eliminate competition, raise the cost of doing business, and cut into the farmers' profits so that farmers could not get ahead any longer.
All right, Andrew Carnegie we've talked about quite a bit. A poor Scottish immigrant known as the Man of Steel. And of course we talked about him with the Bessemer Project, and he is going to be the founder of Carnegie Steel. Now his idea, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, is vertical consolidation, and that is having control of everything to do with his business. The shipping, the ore, the distribution, the raw materials. So everything that had to do with his business, he would buy out. Eventually, he's going to sell to J.P. Morgan for $250 million, $5.2 billion in today's money, which will make him the richest man in the world for that time. Ultimately, he's going to give 70% of all his money to charity. All right, this is J.P. Morgan, J. Pierpont Morgan, and he is known as the most well-known banker in American history. On several occasions, he actually saved the United States economy from depression. Andrew Mellon, interesting guy. He was also, he was the son of a banker, and he went into lumber business when he was only 17 years old. And then he got into finance, Mellon Finance. Ultimately, he invests in a new ore called aluminum, and he is going to own an aluminum company, which, of course, aluminum, just an amazing metal, lightweight metal that's going to take off. He's going to organize the Gulf Oil Company, and he is going to be the Secretary of the Treasury. Under Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Hoover. Only thing he was really dead wrong about was the coming of the Great Depression. He was considered a genius at finance, but when he died in 1937, he donated $10 million in his art collection to MoMA, for the Museum of Modern Art. I've been waiting for. This is John D. Rockefeller. And remember we said Edwin Drake drilled the first oil well, but as more and more uses were found for petroleum, more and more speculators jumped in to drill their own wells. And these speculators were referred to as wildcatters. Then John D. Rockefeller and a few other guys formed a monopoly called the Standard Oil Company. Within 5 years, these men were delivering 7,500 barrels of oil every day to refineries. Ultimately, Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company became the biggest refinery in the United States, and he monopolized the oil refining in the United States for many years. Eventually, the government is going to come along and bust up the Standard Oil monopoly. But John D., he was pretty clever, and he found ways to hang on to his fortune. At his peak, John D. Rockefeller was worth about $250 billion in today's money. That's 2 times more than Bill Gates.
This Pennsylvania oil well marks the origin of an industry so lucrative that its founder became synonymous with great wealth, John D. Rockefeller. The oil poured out and the money poured in as 20th century Americans began to hit the road. Rockefeller established his group of refineries, known as the Standard Oil Corporation, at just the right moment to fuel a new national obsession, the automobile. Rockefeller expanded his financial empire by buying all the oil refineries in his home city of Cleveland, Ohio, and establishing a trust to run them. In this way, he soon controlled about 3/4 of the oil industry in the United States. In this process, he gained a reputation as one of the financial robber barons of early corporate America. From childhood, Rockefeller had a way with money. At the age of 12, he began charging interest for money he loaned to friends. He established his first company when he was 20 years old. He was a devoted family man, and his descendants include grandsons Nelson, Vice President of the United States under Gerald Ford, and Winthrop, a governor of Arkansas, as well as a great-grandson, Jay, a member of the U.S. Senate. John D. retired in 1896. He had spent the first part of his life making money. He would spend the rest of it giving it away. In 1911, the Supreme Court used the Sherman Antitrust Act to break the Standard Oil empire into several separate companies. After that, Rockefeller was still the wealthiest man in the country. Devoted to educational and health causes, he used his fortune to establish the University of Chicago, Rockefeller University, and the Rockefeller Foundation for the Pursuit of Sciences and the Humanities. He also financed a campaign to rid the southern states of the parasite known as hookworm. Even world-changing entrepreneurs need relaxation. Rockefeller's golfing helped him weather a bout of poor health. It seemed to work. He lived to be 97 years old. The skills he had learned as a bookkeeper in Cleveland helped Rockefeller build the greatest fortune amassed up to that time. Accused by the media of being ruthlessly money-hungry, Rockefeller responded by calling on the sense of social responsibility his mother instilled in him. Rockefeller's donations to charitable causes and religious institutions amounted to some $535 million. In the end, Rockefeller lived up to one of his own favorite sayings: "It is a good thing to let money be my servant, and not to make myself a slave to money."
So 97 years old, and again, giving a lot of security. The two main industries at this point in time, of course, were oil and steel, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and then ultimately J.P. Morgan. All right, so to deal with these new businesses, corporations are going to be formed. And corporations, a little bit different. Up until this time, it was mainly single business or partnerships. But corporations are owned by many people. But it's treated by law as a single person, and that's a court case that we can get into, but we're not going to right now. Every corporation has to have a board of directors. It can raise big capital by selling stocks, and the capital be used to expand, buy out other companies, and they have limited liability. So limited liability basically means if you're suing, they can't take your personal property. Corporations always have also have a tendency to diversify. So this is, the bigger you get, the more difficult it is to have a single owner. So these are some words that you need to know as they pertain to a corporation. Stockholders are the people who own a corporation through shares. Stocks, shares of ownership. So if you buy a share of stock in a company, you are a part owner in that company with voting rights. A monopoly is a single company that controls an entire market. So Rockefeller at one time had a monopoly on oil. Carnegie almost a monopoly on steel. They are illegal. You cannot do that. We have to have competition. A trust is a legal concept that allows a person to manage another person's property, but they're going to use a trust to cover up monopolies. So it gets a little tricky. If you're a trustee, you can be over Company A and Company B. So is there a conflict of interest there? Sometimes. So if you're in a trust, the government looks over this very, very carefully. Let's talk about vertical integration. So vertical integration was something that Rockefeller used a lot. Basically, he is going to, I'm sorry, I meant Carnegie, okay? So if Carnegie, in this particular case, it's an oil company. So if you're going to integrate vertically, you're buying everything that contributes to the production of your product. For instance, if you're an oil company, then you buy the pipeline, you buy the trucking, you buy the drilling equipment. Let's use another example. Say you're McDonald's and you want to vertically integrate. Okay, you might buy a bakery. So you have your buns. You might buy a meat packing plant, so you have all your meat products. You might buy a Coca-Cola company. You might buy a paper company for all of your paper products. So you buy everything that has to do with your business. Therefore, people can't price you out, or you'll always have the things that you need for your business. Horizontal integration is a little bit different. So your Smith Oil Company, you buy Jones Oil Company, an ABC Oil Company, an XYZ Oil Company. Let's take that same example with McDonald's, and you want to horizontally integrate. You buy Whataburger, you buy Burger King, you buy Sonic. So you're buying all these companies that produce the same product you do. And then if somebody wants a burger, you can price them out. You've got the market. So when we're evaluating these folks, are they good guys, robber baron, philanthropists, or are they bad guys, robber baron? This is the Vanderbilt Summer Estate in upstate New York. Looks more like a castle. This is Vanderbilt's home in New York, Hyde Park, New York. This is an example of his bedroom there, and everything is gilded gold. He took it as Louis XIV in Versailles Palace, and then they had the golden bedroom, and this is what he modeled that bedroom after. A little opulent, perhaps. J.P. Morgan, he basically said, if you have to ask how much something cost, you can't afford it, and that's what he thought about with money. They are going to pass an act called the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, and this is very important, you guys. Put a little star by this one. This is the first legislation that is put into effect to control monopolies. They don't do too much of this, though, until 1900, when Theodore Roosevelt becomes president.